Hello, now we're back with part 2 of our exercise where we use the new Keynesian model to obtain numerical results. Let's go back to where we were. Where we left off in part 1, we had calculated the output gap for each of the two alternative scenarios, alternative 1 and alternative 2, and we found that under alternative 1 we had a reduction in equilibrium output of and a negative output gap of 0.6%. And then we had in alternative 2 also a reduction in equilibrium output, but the reduction was not as severe, and we conjectured that that was because of the discretionary loosening of monetary policy. That was the reason why alternative 2 posted a more mild result, a more mild downturn than alternative 1. But now what we want to do is we want to go and calculate the equilibrium interest rates, both real and nominal, and also the equilibrium inflation rates. And also what we're going to calculate is GDP in dollars. So how do we do that? We started off in the previous video by using this big expression, and we took a contributions approach and we added up the contributions. So now what we're going to do is we're going to take that result here along with some other elements of our analysis, and we're going to put everything together into an estimate for the equilibrium real interest rate, and we're going to be using the real Taylor rule here. So now I'm going to be going downstairs to get some parameters here. You'll see, by the way, that the real Taylor rule, we have to be careful of the signs, because even people who have a lot of experience at this can get very tripped up in the signs. So in fact, let's move over here to look at the Taylor rule, the real Taylor rule, very, very carefully. The natural rate of interest is going to have a positive sign. This is the expectations gap. It's going to have a positive sign. Then we're going to have this element about the gap, and we're going to be putting in the equilibrium gap. That's going to have a positive sign. But now here we're going to have a negative sign on supply shocks. And that should make sense, because when we have an adverse supply shock, that's when we raise interest rates. But then when we have a beneficial supply shock, when supply increases, that's when we can reduce interest rates. And then finally, our discretionary element just has a positive sign. So positive, 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 negative, and positive. Okay, we have to keep that in mind as we add things up. Okay, so let's go and put in here an equal sign, and let's go downstairs and find our natural real interest rate, which we have been using as we've been estimating this to be just under 3%, 2.8%. Okay, then we're going to go up and we're going to add, and we've already done this calculation here. This is our expectations gap. It's the beta pi parameter times the difference between expected and target inflation, although we know that in this case it's 0, but we're going to put it in there anyway because we may want to change our assumptions later on. And then what we want to do is we want to add up. Now here I'm going to be very generous with parentheses just to make sure that I've separated things off. So you'll notice here that first I want to get, these are familiar terms to us, beta pi minus 1, and then we're going to take that and we're going to multiply that times 1 over the elasticity of short-run aggregate supply with respect to the price level, and then we're going to add on, as you can see, the response to the gap. So that's that guy down there, okay? And then and I'm gonna be very liberal here. I'm gonna wall this off with a paren because we're multiplying this and then we're adding this, and then I want to wall this off with another paren, and then what I want to do is I want to take this and multiply it I want to take this and multiply it times our our result for the equilibrium gap. So let's make sure that we have the right number of parens here. We're closing that off. We're closing that off. So there's our output gap term. Then we have to go and do our supply shock. Now remember, I said that there's a minus in there. It's easy to forget about that minus. So we're going to take this, and I'm going to once again be very generous with the parens here, and I'm going to take this this guy, and then I'm going to multiply it by this guy. So I'm taking beta minus 1 and multiplying it by the inverse of the elasticity of supply, short run, and then I'm going to take that and that whole term, and I'm going to multiply it times our supply shock that we had upstairs, okay, and that's this guy here, okay, and then I'm going to add on our discretionary element, okay. So once again, before I press the enter button, I want to fix everything that's a parameter. So that's a parameter there, okay, that's a parameter, that's a parameter, and that's a parameter, and that's a parameter, and that's a parameter. All right, and now I'm going to press the enter button, and okay. Now all I'm going to do is I'm going to take that and I'm going to copy this over here to alternative 2, and we've learned already that the real interest rate is almost 100 basis points higher under alternative 1 than it is under alternative 2. 2.6 under alternative 1, 1.7 under alternative 2. So yes, monetary policy was substantially looser under alternative 2. Okay, so now let's go calculate the inflation rate. Okay, so let's go double check here for just 1 second. Let's bring our, we're going to be looking here at our Phillips curve, and what does our Phillips curve tell us? It tells us that equilibrium inflation is going to be equal to the expected rate of inflation times the inverse of the short-run aggregate supply elasticity multiplied by the in parens the gap minus productivity-based shock. So that's a little bit easier here. I think that's a little bit easier. So let's go back and pick up our terms here. Okay, so the first thing that we do to get inflation is go upstairs and we ask, well, what was expected inflation? And expected inflation was 2.4%. Then we're going to add, and we're going to take our familiar term that we already have calculated here, our inverse, and here it is. Okay, so the inverse of that, and then we're going to take that and we're going to multiply it. We're going to multiply it times our new equilibrium gap. Okay, and we should know right now that because the gap is negative, that's going to tell us that inflation is lower. But then we're going to subtract off our productivity-based shock, okay, which is our short-run aggregate supply shock, another name for that, and we know that that was adverse, so that's going to raise inflation, okay? So now before we do this, okay, this is a very easy equation because we only have one parameter. So let's do that there, okay? So now, let's make sure that we've done this right. Expected inflation, our supply curve, elasticity down here, and then we're going to add the gap and we're going to subtract off our supply. So we'll see here that this is going to have a positive effect. Why? Because a negative minus a negative is a positive. Okay? So now let's take this and let's copy it over here. So you can see that we're going to have to put up with more inflation under Alt 2. So you could see that there's an inflation implication. Finally, probably one of the easiest calculations we need to do, let's just take this and add this up, and we're going to get a number for the nominal interest rate. Okay, so it's going to be 5.2, interestingly, which is the same as under the baseline, and then also, okay, it's going to be 4.7. So you can see that this is the result of the loosening here. Now the last thing, we haven't done this very much, but I've stressed in other parts of the book that all we need to do to get back to dollars is to take our potential output, that's the level of output under the baseline, which was 13,206,000,000, and we're going to multiply this times 1 plus the output gap, and the output gap is here, it's negative, so we should expect a number that's a little bit lower than that, and we get that by about $100 billion, okay? And we're going to do the same thing here, and we're going to take that and multiply it times 1 plus our output gap here, which once again is negative, but not quite so much. So we're actually, you can see that in dollar terms, our output is a little bit higher under Alt 2 than Alt 1, but we kind of already knew that because Alt 2, once again, is a scenario that envisages substantial discretionary loosening by the monetary authority, by the central bank. Okay, so what have we done? In our first video, we compiled all of these elements here from this big equation, and now you have learned that this equation is actually not so intimidating. Why? Because it has 1, 2, 3, 4 contributing elements. Okay, then we applied and we got the gap here. Then we applied our real Taylor expression, which you've actually done in previous chapters, and we've applied our Phillips curve, which is even easier and you've already done, and we got our real rate of interest and our rate of inflation, and we got our nominal rate of interest. That's what we would read about in the newspaper, and we would get our dollar value of GDP, and we did this for both scenario 1 and scenario 2. So now we have a better idea of how we got those numbers.